Hello everybody. I'm pretty excited for today's video because we're going to be looking at a vintage uninterruptible power supply, which is something that I've been wanting to get a hold of and cover for a long time. This is an American Power Conversion back UPS 200, and it was made in 1996. This is the smallest general purpose UPS that APC ever made. This is rated for 200 volt amps or 130 watts. This is a pretty tiny UPS indeed. Most of the UPSs we've covered have been in the 1500 volt amp range. Now, if you're up to snuff on your APC product history, you may be saying, well, wait a gosh darn minute, Flo. A couple of years ago, APC sold a UPS called the Back UPS Connect 90, and it was rated for 125 volt amps or 75 watts, and you would be right. APC sold that unit. They discontinued it, I think, in 2021 or 22, and it was significantly smaller in capacity than this unit. However, I don't consider the Back UPS Connect 90 a general purpose UPS because, first of all, it only had ungrounded outlets on it. It did not have grounded outlets. And second, in the manual for it, APC said that it was only designed to run loads like modems, routers, cordless phone bases, stuff like that. And so between that and the lack of grounded outlets, you couldn't even plug something like a laptop computer into it. Well, this thing, APC placed no such limitations. You could plug whatever you want into it, as long as it doesn't exceed the rated capacity. On APC's website of the time, this being their smallest UPS they sold, on the website they suggested that you buy a UPS like this for whatever they called green PCs. I don't know what exactly the how you qualify that, but that's what they designed this for, was so-called green PCs. So as you can see here, this is quite a small UPS indeed, at least compared to the ones we've been looking at. It's quite a long feller, you can see, but it's very narrow. It's not very high, and it's just light enough. I can lift it with one hand. So it is much smaller and lighter than the UPSs we've looked at in the past. I love APC units from this era. I love the design of them. It's very simple and elegant. I love this big, chunky power switch on them, which, as you can see, has a green, what the layman would call a green neon lamp. Obviously it's not neon since it's glowing green, but some sort of arc discharge lamp, probably filled with argon. But a green discharge lamp to indicate that it's turned on. And yeah, it's just a very cute, very simple, elegant design. I really love these 90s back UPS units, and I was really lucky, really happy to get this one, not just because it's a APC UPS from the 90s, but because it's kind of notable in being the smallest UPS APC sold at the time. I bought this on eBay. I paid $5 for it, plus $30 shipping, because it is quite a weighty thing. Seller shipped it in a shoebox though, which is kind of cute. The seller shipped it with the original battery in it, and I know it was the original battery because the battery had a date code of 1996 on it. The original battery that this takes is strange. This is a 12 volt system, which you might expect. You know, APC's larger UPSs are 24 volts, so it's no surprise that a small one like this runs on 12 volts. But instead of a 12 volt battery, APC chose to use two 6 volt lead acid batteries in series, two 4 amp hour batteries in series. And that's strange. Why would they do that when there were perfectly reasonable 12 volt batteries that would be equivalent or maybe even slightly greater in capacity that they could have used. I don't know, maybe the 6-volt 4 amp hour battery was a cheaper battery to buy. Maybe that was the most economical thing to do. So obviously that battery was completely bad, and I kind of hummed and hawed on how to repower this thing. You can buy new batteries. You can go on DigiKey and buy a 6-volt 4 amp hour battery for 20 bucks. So, you know, 40 bucks, have a new set of batteries for this thing. The first thing I did was I took one of my existing 12-volt lead acid batteries, which I have a small collection of now, and I just hack job wired it to it to make sure the UPS was functional, and it was. So I could have purchased a new set of the proper batteries for this thing, but it seems silly to do when I have all these 12-volt 7 amp hour batteries lying around. And while normally a 12-volt 7 amp hour battery, that's the standard battery that UPSs use, most UPSs, the inside this thing, and we'll see it later, there's a plastic cage that the batteries live in. You actually install the batteries through the bottom. That door opens up right there, and that's where you'd put your two 6-volt 4 amp hour batteries once you wired the little jumper between them to string them in series. Now, obviously, you can probably tell just by looking at it, a 12-volt 7 amp hour battery won't fit through that metal door. And indeed, it won't fit inside the plastic cage that's inside the UPSs that cradles the batteries in place. But I found that if I removed that plastic cage, which was fairly easy to do, took the cover off the unit, removed the plastic cage, which was held in with some screws, then I could fit a standard 12-volt 7 amp hour battery in place. I did some slightly redneck zip tie job to hold the battery in place. I fabricated a spacer out of cardboard to make it so there was no chance of the battery shorting out against the circuit board, which sits up top. And it works. And I was able to fit a 12-volt 7 amp hour battery in here. And it was not only free for me, but it's almost double the capacity of the original battery pack that was in this thing. So that's great. Now, of course, one of the implications of this is that these UPSs, especially the back UPSs, the biggest difference between a back UPS and a smart UPS is that while the smart UPSs are pure sine wave, the back UPSs are modified sine wave. The output waveform is basically a stepped square wave. It's a square wave that steps up halfway up the voltage level, and then it steps up again, and then it goes back down. So kind of a stepped square wave output. You wouldn't want to run everything on a modified sine wave output, but for most stuff, especially for most switching power supplies like those found in computers, it'll work just fine. Now, because this is a cheaper back UPS with a modified sine wave inverter, another thing was that the inverters are just not as heavily built as the ones in the smart UPSs. This is still a very high quality UPS, and I would say it's probably built way heavier than UPSs, cheap UPSs you can buy today. But there's no active cooling. There's no fan in here, for example, and so when you subvert the original design intention by sticking a battery in here that's double the capacity, can keep it running for double the amount of time, you got to be careful, because APC always designed, and to this day designs their UPS to be able to run for 5 minutes at a full load. That's how much battery power they stick in, enough battery to run a full rated load for 5 minutes. And that's because if this thing was running its full rated load for more than 5 minutes, there's a chance the inverter could overheat. Now, I have subverted that little secondary safety feature by sticking in a higher capacity battery that'll allow this thing to run for more than 5 minutes at a full load. So I just got to be careful. I'll never run this thing at full load anyway, but just something to be careful about. So looking over this thing, I've shown you the big power switch, which I really like about this thing, and that's the only control on the entire unit. There's no testing functionality. This thing doesn't do a self-test. It's just turn it on or turn it off. When it's turned off, power to the outlets is cut off. However, the battery does continue to charge for as long as it's plugged into the wall. Bring it around behind here. We've got just 2 outlets, and you can probably tell these outlets are off-the-shelf parts, and I forget if these are made by Leviton or if they're made by someone else, but these are an off-the-shelf outlet that APC bought and bolted in here. Kind of cool. We've got a circuit breaker here, pops out on an overload condition. The circuit breaker is actually in series with the mains cord input here, so it will protect from an overload condition as long as the UPS is running on mains power. If it's running on the inverter and then there's an overload condition, this breaker won't do anything. But I can kind of see why they put the breaker on the main side, because then it also protects in case something shorts on the circuitry of the UPS itself. So maybe that's why they did it. The breaker is also rated for 3 amps, which seems a little over capacity to me, but maybe they're accounting for if, you know, you turn something on and there's a bit of a surge. You got a little light to tell you if there's a wiring fault. I assume that means if there's an open ground, that'll light up. And you do get some dip switches here to configure the unit. You've got 2 dip switches here that actually change the voltage at which the UPS will switch to its inverter. So if you want to make it more sensitive, so I've got both those switches down so it will be as sensitive as possible. And then you've got a switch to delay the alarm. There is a piezo buzzer in this thing. When the power goes out, it will alarm, and there's no way to shut it up, and it is extremely loud. It is so much louder than a smart UPS. It's basically as loud as a smoke alarm. That's how loud the buzzer in this thing is, and I don't understand. So I did what I've actually heard of quite a few people doing with these if they use them. I just desoldered the buzzer altogether. I got rid of it, so this thing has no beep anymore. But if I had left it intact, we have a switch here to delay the alarm versus the alarm starting immediately after power goes out. And you can see the rating here, 120 volts, 60 hertz. For the back UPS 200, 130 watts, 2 amps. For the back UPS 280, 180 watts, 3 amps. And I guess the 280 maybe uses the same size enclosure based on that. Input rating, 2 amps for the 200. And this was made in USA. APC stuff back in the 80s and 90s. This was just top-notch, like the best UPSs you could get. APC today, they no longer hold that status. Not since they were bought by Schneider Electric. They're just not as good as they used to be. This was a high-quality piece of American-made equipment back in the 90s. Funny here, it says for use with computer loads only. So they don't want you to do something like plug an incandescent lamp into this thing, but I will do that as one of the tests. For use in a controlled environment, refer to manual, blah, 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 blah. The output of this device is not sinusoidal. It has a total harmonic distortion of 37%. And a maximum single harmonic of 25%. And that's all on account of it being a modified sine wave. It's basically saying the waveform output of this thing is very, very dirty. So, that's pretty much your lot. I don't think there's much to say on the bottom. It does indicate that your battery access is through this metal door. Take that screw out, the door flips open. You could remove your battery pack. You can see the nubs of the zip ties I've used to keep my new battery in place. So, we'll do some load testing on this thing just for fun. I mean, if I turn it on right now and I cut power, which is on this switch, we're running. We're running on the inverter. And unlike a smart UPS, you've seen the smart UPSs I've shown on this channel, very loud inverters. They buzz really loudly, this very bassy 60 hertz buzz. Back UPS is silent, and that's on account of it being a modified sine wave inverter. It just works differently such that it doesn't buzz so loudly. This thing's silent. You can't hear it over the background noise in here. Turn power back on. After about 1 second, it transfers back to the mains power. You can hear a relay click when it switches to the inverter. And turn power back on. Alright, let me get a lamp and we'll come back. Our voltage today is 118.7 volts. I now have a 100 watt incandescent lamp plugged into the UPS. You can see 97 watts. And I will cut mains power right now. And we are running on the inverter. Now, you can see there was quite a significant dip in the output voltage, although it did recover a little bit. This thing isn't perfect, and I'm not entirely sure if that's due to age or if that's just the way these were. Now, the cool thing about a back UPS versus a smart UPS, at least with these old back UPSs, is that everything's actually human adjustable. There are potentiometers in this thing to adjust the output voltage and the output frequency. So I've actually purposely trimmed down the output voltage on this thing. I originally adjusted it for about 110 volts, although obviously you can see it wavers a little bit. And how's our frequency? Because that should be right on 60. That's pretty darn good. Now, I'm going to turn mains power back on. And we're on again. And I'm going to cut mains power again and just watch how this light bulb responds. Hopefully you can see it on camera. I don't know if you could see that. Actually, you know what? A better way to see it, power's back on again. A better way to see it is if I get a much lower wattage light bulb. So let me go find one of those. I now have a 25 watt light bulb installed. I've also lowered the exposure on my camera. I'm going to cut mains power and just watch what this does. Hopefully you can catch it. I think you caught that. You may have seen the light bulb did a great flash of very bright light before it dimmed down due to the lower output voltage on the UPS. This UPS, when it transfers over to its inverter, it does a great surge from the outlets. There is a huge surge in voltage, which is a little unsettling to me. And again, I don't know if this is the way these always were or not. I don't know. Mains power coming on. Let's just do that one more time. It's very brief, but it is a very bright flash. I would say, you know, I don't have an oscilloscope with me here to measure it, but I would bet the output voltage jumps to something like 150 or 160 volts when it transfers over. And if I had to guess, if it's not due to age, it could be just due to the difference in, like, maybe the inverter frequency is not always synchronized to the mains power frequency, and that discrepancy in the frequency causes the voltages to sum together. Or maybe it's an inductive kick from the transformer when it switches over. I don't know. Or is there age-related degradation or some other kind of defect with this thing? I don't know, but there is quite the surge in voltage. I'll do it again here. When mains power is lost. The reason this is more visible with a lower wattage incandescent lamp is that the filament is smaller and it responds to changes in voltage more quickly. I now have 125 watts of incandescent lighting plugged into this thing. We are 100% loaded with just this. So let's cut power and see what it does, how it sounds. And we're running. She is buzzing audibly, but still much quieter than a smart UPS. It's doing good. Steady voltage. I don't think the voltage or frequency wavers at all when this thing's on its inverter, save for that little adjustment in the output voltage it did in the beginning. But there we are. As you can see, we're holding 111 volts, 112. And I had originally set it for 110, so it regulates its voltage quite well. You know, after that, after that initial test where it kind of started at 105. Frequency is holding. And actually, because of the lowered voltage, we're only doing 88 watts on this thing. Yeah. There you go. It's a lovely little unit. The only thing I wish it didn't do was that surge in voltage that it does, transferring over to its inverter, but maybe that's how these things always were. No idea. Mains power coming on. And we're back. Let's try a magnetically ballasted fluorescent light fixture. Oh, it didn't like that. That was running on the low brightness setting. Let's do it from the high brightness setting. And you can still see that voltage surge. Got a lot dimmer too. Now let's try the low brightness. It's just barely hanging on. The current is very, very low. Turn mains power back on. There you go. Magnetically ballasted fluorescent light fixtures. In my testing, at least low power factor ones. I have not tested high power factor ones, but in general, low power factor ones generally don't mind all that much running on a modified sine wave inverter. You'll notice one kind of quirk of these, although I'm sure it was intended in the design, is that if they're not plugged into mains power, they will not turn on with the switch. You can't use it as a general purpose inverter and switch it on and off at your own will. It'll only run on the inverter once it's been running on mains power first. And likewise, if it's running on the inverter and I shut it off, it will not turn back on. How about we open this thing up, take a look inside. Remove these 4 screws on the bottom, and then you kind of got to take both your hands, pry the sides of the case apart, although not too wide, lest you bend it, and then lift the white cover off. Here is the inside of the back UPS 200. The first thing you notice is the 12 volt 7 amp hour battery that I've rednecked in here, and it fits like a glove, almost like it was designed to be there in the first place. You can see my zip tie downs, which actually do a very good job of holding the battery very still so it'll never move around. But just for extra safety, I've also got this little cardboard shim which goes on the top and isolates the battery, namely the contacts from the circuit board, which you can see. This is the one circuit board, spans the entire top, and you can also see this big transformer. Now there's another littler transformer right there, and it's actually not clear to me if the big transformer is what's boosting the voltage for the inverter, or is it the little transformer doing the inverter duties. Now, of course, if you've ever seen an automotive inverter, something you'd buy for your car that plugs into the cigarette lighter to provide 120 volts, they're a modified sine wave inverter, and they've got a little transformer about the size of that one for an inverter that would be rated for more than 130 watts. So that little transformer could very well be the one that's actually being used as the inverter, and maybe this is just doing power supply duties when the unit's running on mains power for charging the battery and such. Not sure, could be either one of them. Knowing APC, I would hope that it's actually this big transformer. You can see this big transformer was wiggling around. This is how I got this thing. There's one screw holding it in, and there's a screw sticking up from the bottom, but no nut in it. This is how I got the unit, so I would assume, and it had the original battery in it, so definitely I would think nobody's ever been inside it, so maybe that's just the way it was built. But you look right there, you can see there's really not much for any intelligence in here. There's no microcontroller or anything. It's all 7400 series logic and then some analog chips as well. Get some metal oxide varistors for surge protection. And it's kind of nice. Everything plugs in. There's nothing, well, I was about to say there's nothing soldered onto the board for wires, but I did just find one soldered wire. But most of the wires here are removable. And you got some big heat sinks for the transistors that do the switching duty for the inverter. And yeah, you've got a 40 amp automotive fuse permanently soldered on there, which seems kind of over capacity for me. 40 amps at 12 volts, that would be 480 watts, which is more than double this thing's capacity. Actually, more than triple this thing's capacity. But then again, an inverter like this is not going to be very efficient, although I've actually measured the efficiency. When I first got this thing, I actually put a multimeter in series with the battery to measure the current drawn from the battery, and I found the inverter to be about 60% efficient, which is actually right on par for stuff like this. With no load on it, running on the inverter draws about 800 milliamps of current. And I suspect that with a full load, the inverter would be drawing close to 15 amps of current, which is not bad at all, and of course is the reason why they could make this thing a 12 volt unit rather than a 24 volt unit like the larger UPSs. In there you can see the outlets and the circuit breaker, which are just off-the-shelf parts pretty much. And up here, right here, is where the buzzer would have gone, which I removed in short order. And you can see the trimmers. This is the trimmer for the output frequency. Here's the trimmer for the output voltage. And I believe, oh, this trimmer's for the, looks like it's for the transfer voltage. So that's sort of a sub-control, because you have the switches on the back, the dip switches that you'd normally use. And then there is a trimmer on the other side right here, which adjusts your battery charge voltage, which is very nice. I've read a lot of people online saying that these older back UPSs, they have a problem with overcharging the battery. In fact, I read one account that said the charging circuitry in these is just a 7815 voltage regulator with a diode in series. Well, maybe that's the case with the even older ones than this, but with this one, that's not how it goes at all. The battery voltage is adjustable, and I've actually dialed it in for 13.3 volts. Which is great that I was able to do that. So any battery I put in here should be able to last a very long time. I've played with the trimmers for fun. The frequency adjustment goes about between 48 hertz and 70 some hertz. And the voltage output goes between, I think, 80 volts, and the highest I was comfortable putting it was 140 volts because the inverter started sounding quite angry at those high voltages. So you do get quite a range of adjustment. Alright, you know I had to do it. We're going to try running a computer on this UPS. I've got this Dell Inspiron that we installed OpenSense on that I've been using as a router here for, well, ever since that video. And I've got my monitor plugged into it too. So we're using a total of 120 volt amps, so we're a little over halfway loaded on this thing. Let's cut the power. And we're off to the races. And I don't really care about the computer, but I hope my monitor doesn't mind running on modified sine wave power. I would be a little sad if my monitor broke. So as you can see, we're doing fine here. Our reactive power reduced by quite a lot, funny enough. We're only using 80 volt amps now, down from 120. That's very interesting. Watts. 67 watts, 66 watts. That's funny. Our power, our real power and our reactive power both went down by quite a bit. Are switching power supplies actually more efficient running on modified sine wave power? I don't know. Doing good though. We've got 60 hertz, 112 volts. Cool. Maybe I'll leave this for like 10 minutes. Just make sure this thing can actually do its job and run a computer for a while. Run a router, a real important job. Keep a router running while the power's out. See if you can listen to this thing. If you can listen to it buzz away. No, I can't tell by ear if it's that big transformer running or if it's the one up there buzzing. No clue. It's been, I would say, about 20 minutes, and the UPS is working just fine. No weird noises, smells, sights, anything. And the computer and monitor are still working fine as well. I measured the voltage of the battery. It's at about 11.8 volts. Of course, this is an old and slightly worn out battery. But that's pretty good after 20 minutes of running at over a 50% load. So, turn power back on. And we're on mains power again. Cool, did just fine. The charge current applied to the battery is only 300 milliamps, not a whole lot at all. So on a battery almost double the size of the original like this one, that'll be many hours that'll take to charge. I guess probably around about 24 hours or so. Funny enough, when the UPS is turned off, there is slightly more current into the battery than there is when it's turned on, so the battery will charge slightly faster, which is kind of funny. Well, everyone, that's all there is to show of the American Power Conversion Back UPS 200 uninterruptible power supply from 1996. I really love this thing. This is such a neat, smartly designed, little, adorable, compact baby UPS. And I really like this thing. I'm glad I've been able to get my hands on it, and it's just been an awful treat showing it to you guys. I love vintage UPSs, especially vintage APC UPSs. I mean, I like UPSs in general. Anything to do with backup power just tickles my brain in just the right way. But these APC UPSs from the 80s and 90s, just the design of them, there's just something that really attracts me to them. I would love to find one of the 80s APC UPSs, like the 600 VX and the 1200 RT, or maybe it was called the 600 RT and the 1200 VX. Those were one of the original UPSs made by APC. They're enormous. They're extremely heavy. I think the 1200 volt amp unit weighs like over 100 pounds. Gosh, wouldn't I love to have one of them, but the shipping cost alone, on the rare occasion one of them shows up on eBay, it'd be a stupid use of my money to buy something like that. But it would be really cool if I could get my hands on one of those 1980s units someday. But for now, I'm really glad to have found this guy. Now, this thing works. I've repowered it with a new, much larger than original battery. The next question is, where do I use this thing? This isn't exactly something that I want to use super critical or you know, equipment on that's super important to me, because, you know, it's a almost 30-year-old piece of equipment. You just don't know if something could go terribly awry, if the inverter could do something crazy and surge the voltage and possibly harm whatever you plug into this. At the same time, though, I've had this plugged in for, well, pretty much ever since I got it. It's been a few months now, and this thing seems to work perfect. And I'm kind of on the way to just being able to trust this thing in general. But with that said, with only a 200 volt amp capacity, there's not a whole lot I can run on this. I'm most certainly not going to run my computer on it. I probably won't run any computer on it. But I've come up with an idea of some stuff that I could use with this thing just for the fun of it. I don't know if you've noticed, I had at least one viewer who did notice. I'm building something behind my work table here. I took the biggest panels from my old computer desk that I used in my old apartment that was more or less garbage, and I've just set them up against the wall here, and I'm mounting some telephone equipment. I want to eventually get back into playing with some telephone equipment again. You can see I've got my Northstar 6x16, I've got a Northstar ATA, I've got my 1A2 KSU, my voice over IP adapter. I'm gonna have telephone equipment mounted here, possibly some other network equipment, and I would like the stuff mounted on this wall to be backed up with this UPS. I think it'd be perfect for it. None of it uses a lot of power, and most certainly stuff like the Northstar KSU here, this thing was designed to run on the UPSs of the time with modified sine wave inverters, so it shouldn't have a problem at all either. So yeah, I think that's how I'd like to use this thing. I'll set it somewhere here, and it can be dedicated to keeping stuff on this wall running once I actually get the stuff on this wall running. But for now, I hope you've enjoyed a look at this tiny vintage UPS. I've certainly enjoyed showing it to you. And thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.